Coming up on Bridge City News, 4 men were arrested and charged with child exploitation in Medicine Hat. The new city manager from Lethbridge speaks about the challenges the city is facing during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we hear from the president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms about why he wrote a scathing letter to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau repeated his call today for everyone to wear masks in public. Trudeau says individual actions will be key in controlling a second wave of COVID-19. He says pandemics often produce more than one surge in infections, and provinces must be ready to take action. He says it's important to wear a mask when you cannot keep within 2 meters from another person in a store or while taking public transportation. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says his government has no intention of making a COVID-19 vaccine mandatory if one becomes available. Kenney says there's been misinformation that the government recently adopted a new law requiring mandatory vaccinations. He says if a safe vaccine is developed and approved, his government would only encourage people to use it. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says there were 33 new cases of COVID-19 in our province, along with 4 new deaths. So far, 5,710 people have recovered from the virus. There are still 926 active cases, including 97 here in the South Zone. Henshaw says cases in Brooks and Calgary are stable, and we're not seeing much of an increase.
The major outbreaks at the plants in both High River and Brooks have made a sizable contribution to the overall case numbers in both of those cities. At Cargill, there are now only 5 active cases, with 943 recovered. At the JBS plant, we see similar progress, with only 10 active cases and 640 workers recovered. All of these signs are encouraging.
The JBS beef processing plant near Brooks returned to 2 shifts a day today for the first time in a month. The company had reduced operations to a single shift of between 700 to 1,100 employees after some tested positive for COVID-19 and others simply didn't show up for work. JBS Canada says the company has implemented more than 100 safety measures, including temperature tests of all workers entering the plant. Alberta Health says 650 workers at the plant tested positive for COVID-19 and 1 person died. Fortunately, also 638 people have now recovered. The JBS plant managed to remain open at a time when Cargill temporarily shut down in High River for 2 weeks due to a coronavirus outbreak that saw 951 infections and 2 deaths. The Alberta government has begun relaunching its economy. Now, part of the plan is to allow restaurants, bars, and pubs to allow customers back into their establishments up to 50% occupancy. So a large restaurant can serve up to 150 customers. Meanwhile, places of worship, including churches, are only allowed up to 50 people during the COVID-19 pandemic. So what gives? John Carpe is the president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. He wrote a warning letter to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney about this issue and how it's simply not fair to those who run places of worship. John, tell me about some of those concerns.
Well, there's a glaring double standard where the government says that if churches want to hold a drive-in service, they need to have cars 2 meters apart. At the same time, Tim Hortons and McDonald's drive-thrus are serving thousands of people from 1 foot away. Social distancing has to be maintained in churches, but yet restaurants can have 6 customers from 6 different families or households seated together at the same table, 1 or 2 feet apart. So there's social distancing in churches, but not in restaurants. The most frightening thing is the government has asked churches to maintain lists of who is attending religious services, which is something that a police state would do. At the same time, we don't have the stores, restaurants, bars, pubs, cafes with the requirement to maintain lists of their customers. You've got restaurants serving food on plates that are being touched by multiple people and then walked through the restaurant past other restaurant customers, placed on a table where there's no social distancing. Yet at the same time, the government makes it illegal for churches to have communion or the Lord's Supper. You've got daycares and day camps that are open and running, and yet Premier Kenney is saying that churches cannot have a children's church program or a nursery.
Premier Kenney has stated in the past that he's a believer, so why is his government making things so difficult on places of worship?
There doesn't seem to be any public health or scientific standard behind this. I would ask the question, where is the science? if in a church, if a Catholic priest cannot give the communion bread directly to another recipient, why is it okay for restaurants to parade plates of food all through the restaurant and place it in front of customers who are not social distancing? So hopefully he's going to reverse this and give the churches and temples and synagogues and mosques at least as much charter freedom as restaurants, pubs, cafes, and bars.
John Carpe, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, thanks for joining me today from Calgary.
Thank you.
Today is Ascension Day. It marks a holy celebration for Christians around the world. As Micah Quinn explains, the All Saints Roman Catholic Parish Church and St. Augustine's Anglican Church in Lethbridge are both celebrating. They have a hopeful word for their congregants who've had to stay home during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ascension Day is celebrated on the 40th day of Easter, and for Christians, it commemorates the ascension of Jesus Christ to heaven, according to the New Testament of the Bible.
The Feast of the Ascension is probably the most ancient celebration that we have. It's one of those feasts that dates back to the early church. Some will argue the year 68 AD. And it has been celebrated pretty much continually since then. It finds most of its roots in the 5th and 4th century. Ascension Day comes with a hopeful message for Christians. And it's a very important feast day for us because it's that for Jesus to send the Holy Spirit, first he had to ascend into heaven. And so you have that whole part of he had to go so that the Holy Spirit would come. For St. Augustine's Anglican Church, they've already live-streamed a service of spiritual Eucharist,
which is a service where that's an ancient practice of the church. During times when people can't physically partake of the communion elements, we can still hold a Eucharist service where they partake spiritually of the body and blood of Christ.
Reverend Bateman is also keeping things light during this time.
I saw a little meme on Facebook that the Ascension marks the day when Jesus started working from home, which I thought was kind of clever in light of COVID-19 and all that's going on right now.
Next weekend, Christians will be celebrating the Feast of Pentecost. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Today is also World Catholic Education Day. Our province's Education Minister, Adriana LaGrange, says it's a time to pause, reflect, and pray on the gift that is Catholic education. Ramadan is looking a lot different for Muslims around the globe due to physical distancing restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Things are no different for practicing Muslims here in Lethbridge.
COVID happened just a few weeks before Ramadan, and then Ramadan is a time when Muslims all around the world assemble in the mosques, have celebrations about the month. This month of fasting and month of charity and month of good deeds. We are maintaining 2 meter or 6 foot distance between the prayer mats. So we have the capacity of almost 200 in the hall, but we are only allowing 47 people now because of those restrictions. When people enter, we have already circulated a memorandum wherein all the restrictions are mentioned. For example, people have to wear masks when they come in. So people who don't bring their own mask, we are supplying them with masks. They have to sanitize their hands with hand sanitizer, and they are not allowed to stand here and chat and socialize. They have to leave as soon as possible.
4 men in Medicine Hat have been arrested and charged with a variety of child sexual exploitation offenses. It stems from an investigation by Alert's Internet Child Exploitation Unit. ICE teamed up with the Medicine Hat police to make the busts. 78-year-old Blaine Vadnais, 43-year-old Jeremy Unruh, 34-year-old Owen Monteith, and 27-year-old Thomas Binder are all being charged with child pornography offenses. A total of 43 computers and electronic devices were seized. Officials with ICE say they will continue their investigation by conducting a full forensic analysis. It is the first week on the job for new Lethbridge City Manager Craig Dalton. Dalton joined us from Victoria, Prince Edward Island, and most recently served as a federal ombudsman. He says he knows of the challenges ahead, especially when it comes to working through this pandemic.
Try and spend as much time as I can with partners, stakeholders, and citizens, because jobs like this are all about building and maintaining relationships and good means of communication with all of those groups. The council has some clear plans in terms of operational review of city services and other things that they've indicated are important priorities to them. So it's really, again, listening, learning, getting a sense of where we're at, and figuring out as quickly as I can how I can add value.
Dalton took over as the permanent replacement by former interim city manager Bramwell Strain. A very special event is taking place this Saturday. Bikers Building Bridges and the Commandos Motorcycle Club will be heading down to Raymond to help celebrate a young autistic boy's birthday with a ride-by.
A week or two ago, we received a phone call and to let us know that there is a child out in the Raymond area that's autistic, on the spectrum child, and would it be possible for us to get a few bikes to go during COVID-19, ride by, give him a wave, kind of make his day. He missed out on his birthday last year and is missing out this year too for what was planned. So we thought put our heads together, and so we've got it out on social media, talked to a few people, and we're going to go out and do a ride-by and make his day. We're ex-military. I'm ex-military, and my whole life was serving Canada for almost 24 years, serving our country, and we still give back. Most of us are still giving back to our communities and fellow veterans coast to coast.
For more information on how you can be part of this Saturday's event, call John Moreland at 587-220-3511. If you have a library book that needs returning, you're in luck. The Lethbridge Public Library announced that effective today, book returns are open to the public. Items can either be returned to the book return at either the Children's Department entrance of the main branch or the south entrance at the west side location. Officials say books will be quarantined for a minimum 72 hours during the COVID-19 pandemic, and for the time, no late fees will be charged. The library also announced that they are offering limited curbside pickup for anyone looking to pick up items. Lethbridge College received one of the most significant research grants in its history. The college received one of 6 new technology access centers. The $1.75 million 5-year renewable grant will be used to create the Integrated Agriculture Technology Center.
We'll focus on 3 key research areas, primarily large-scale crop production, aquaculture, and wet processing. And they cover quite a range of different sectors. So large-scale crop production might be irrigation, post-harvest research, so making sure that we help producers optimize their yields and ensure it's stored correctly.
Having that here is really going to help us impact the local agriculture community, but it's also going to be accessible provincially and nationally. So right now, in all of these different challenging times that we're facing, we have a real opportunity to help people keep building their businesses, remain competitive, and be quite innovative in different ways.
According to college officials, Southern Alberta's agriculture sector generates $1.1 billion to the economy each and every year. Restaurant Brands International, which owns Tim Hortons, Burger King, and Popeyes, has opened around 1,500 dining rooms. The company says it is working with each municipality across North America to ensure a safe reopening.
We've been open for business in the drive-thrus and delivery for quite some time, and through our mobile app. But now as the country begins to reopen, we're reopening our dining rooms. We probably have about 15% of our restaurants, so about 1,500 restaurants in North America that have started to open their dining rooms. We put in place a very strict standard for reopening, procedures around hand washing, sanitization, PPE, as I mentioned, with acrylic screens and masks and gloves, and we've done all the signage to ensure that we maintain social distancing. And then we're working with each of the local municipalities and the different states and making sure that our franchisees in those municipalities and states are aware of the rules that are being implemented locally, and that we're making sure that we're aligned with the process that each community and each state is implementing for the reopening.
Multiple sclerosis. It's a debilitating disease which affects millions of people around the world. Now, according to the folks with the MS Society of Canada, our country has some of the highest rates in the world, and Southern Alberta has some of the highest rates in Canada.
Lots of question marks around why that is, and certainly poses lots of questions and suspicions around environmental factors. Certainly in Alberta, we do see pockets of increased prevalence, and that's something that our amazing team of researchers are continuing to look closely into.
Catch the full interview with Johanna Green from the MS Society and BCN's Paul Arthur coming up in the second half of our show. A raging wildfire east of Prince Albert, Saskatchewan has now grown to more than 400 square kilometers, which is a 10% increase since Tuesday. Fire officials say ground crews and aircraft are fighting the blaze. The Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency says so far no one has been forced from their homes, but municipalities in the areas including Torch River and Garden River are on alert. The cause of the fire is under investigation, but the agency believes it was started by people. BC Premier John Horgan says the legislature will sit next month, but it will not look like anything it was before to protect politicians from the coronavirus. Horgan says there will be a heavy use of technology that could even allow members to stay in their own community while voting on legislation electronically.
You can expect to see us back here either the 15th or 22nd of June, and we'll be focused on getting the budget passed, getting the estimates process completed, and a modest number of pieces of legislation that we believe are required to keep our agenda moving forward. We have Mike Farnworth's worked very hard with his colleagues, Mary and Sonia, to make sure that we're abiding by the principles of physical distancing, which means that the legislature proper will look different for debates. It'll look different for question period. We're going to be using more technology. We're going to be using multiple rooms within the legislature so that we can keep MLAs at a distance. And there will be, I suspect, I'll leave it to Mike to explain most of the details, but we're using a lot of technology that will perhaps allow members, far-flung members, to stay in their community, to be able to actually do their voting by computer at certain times during the day, rather than having all of our votes assembled for the end of the day, so that we can have everybody together and we can pass our yay or nay on whatever our views are on the legislation that's before the House.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has asked health officials to deliver a plan for expanded testing next week after COVID-19 levels dropped sharply in recent days. Ontario completed just over 10,500 tests in the previous day, marking the fourth straight day the province fell short of its goal of at least 16,000 tests per day.
What I want to see people being tested, and if you have symptoms, please go to an assessment center. I repeat it, if you have symptoms, please go to the assessment center, because a lot of people, we don't seem to see the traffic through the assessment centers. But what I want to see truckers tested. I want to see taxi drivers tested. I want to make sure the long-term care. We can't just test everyone and walk away. We're going to be testing all long-term care once again, the frontline healthcare workers. We want to go into areas of the automotive sector and start testing people in the automotive sector right across the province.
Ottawa announced that it is boosting funding to groups which help Indigenous people living off of reserves by $75 million. That is up from the initial $15 million that it initially allocated for counselling, healthcare, food, and supportive housing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the more than 1 million Indigenous people who live off of reserves deserve services that are culturally appropriate. A new survey of 12 to 17-year-olds finds most of them are feeling sad because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers found 72% of 15 to 17-year-olds are also feeling blue, while close to 60% of 12 to 14-year-olds are unhappy. 52% of kids of visible minority and immigrant children said they were afraid of catching the novel coronavirus versus 34% of non-visible minority kids. We had lots of moisture again today, but will the soggy days continue? A complete look at the weather forecast is coming up. We had lots of rain again today, watering our fields, lawns, and trees, but it should be easing off quite a bit. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, many of our farmers should be pretty happy with the extra moisture.
Yeah, it's been great news for the farmers as we have seen a ton of moisture the past couple of days. 20 to 30 millimeters of rain was expected today alone, but as we look into tonight, we're going to see mainly partly cloudy skies with an overnight low of 4 degrees. The west wind could be around 50, sometimes gusting to 70 km per hour. Into tomorrow, a 30% chance of showers on Friday as well, with a mix of sun and cloud, high of 13 degrees, and an overnight low on our Friday night of 3 degrees. Now let's take a look at what we're going to be seeing for the rest of the weekend as we jump into the sunshine there. 15 degrees is the high for Saturday, climbing to 20 for Sunday under sunny skies. Sunshine expected again on Monday with a high of 21 for Tuesday as well with increasing clouds. And then we could see a 60% chance of showers beginning Tuesday night and into Wednesday for a 60% chance of showers then as well with a high of 17 degrees. And as we look at those averages across the screen there, we see that most of our daytime highs are getting higher than the average right now. 19 is the average. The overnight low average is 5. The high temperature on this day was back in 1980. It was 31 degrees. And the chilliest day was -4. That was in 2001. The sun rose this morning at 5:39 a.m. and our evening sunset 9:17 p.m., giving us 15 and a half hours of sunlight, a little bit more as we look to the west coast into tomorrow's forecast. 18 degrees expected for Victoria, 17 for Vancouver with partly cloudy skies. Chance of rain up in Edmonton with under 8 degrees. 7 degrees is expected to be the high in Calgary tomorrow. They could see a chance of rain as well, about 5 millimeters for both Edmonton and Calgary. Risk of an afternoon thunderstorm in Saskatoon, high of 19. Regina's high 21. They could see some rain there as well. Winnipeg's high 27 degrees. Now, as we look further east, Toronto, mix of sun and cloud, 21 is their high. Lots of sunshine expected tomorrow in Ottawa and Montreal. Look at those highs, though, 29 in Ottawa, 28 in Montreal. Much the same over in Atlantic Canada. So we're seeing some sunshine in Halifax, high of 26, 28 the high for Fredericton, mix of sun and cloud there. Charlottetown's high, 20. And then we could see a 40% chance of showers in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 11 degrees. They could see some wind gusts on the coast there as well, up to 70 kilometers per hour. There you go. That is your forecast.
A prominent cross-border lobby group is launching a campaign to encourage Canada and the United States to join forces in efforts to rebound from the COVID-19 crisis. The Canadian-American Business Association argues that expanding market opportunities in both countries would speed up recovery efforts. It says an integrated North American approach would better equip both Canada and the U.S. to compete in a dramatically different world economy. The campaign, which launched today, is also promoting collaborative efforts to secure personal protective equipment, replenish medical stockpiles, and defend critical cross-border supply chains. Canada Post says it lost $153 million before tax last year. The Crown Corporation cites intense e-commerce competition slowing growth at its parcels business and an ongoing shift toward online communication. Canada Post says processing and delivering packages demands more technology, real estate, and time interacting with customers than handling letters. It says that burden weighs on profits as tech giants such as Amazon expand their reach. Canada Post says the COVID-19 pandemic has the potential of significantly impacting its business this year and next, especially as border closures and travel restrictions continue. Canadian technology companies are warning customers to expect longer wait times as stores reopen. Best Buy Canada and repair chain Mobile Clinic says they expect demand for computer and phone repairs to be quite high. They say Canadians have been putting off having items fixed until they can physically get into a store, which has been difficult during the pandemic. Best Buy says agents will now meet customers at the store entrance to retrieve devices. They will also call customers to find out more about their gadget issues and provide cost estimates and troubleshooting plans. Officials at mobile clinics say due to physical distancing requirements, customers no longer will be allowed to linger at the counter while repairs are being done. Macy's has warned that it could lose more than $1 billion during its first fiscal quarter after the COVID-19 pandemic paralyzed retail operations across North America. The iconic department store chain also says its sales could be down at least 45%. It says it's the latest evidence the pandemic is widening the divide between big box stores like Walmart and mall-based clothing chains. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 112 points to finish the day at 14,884. The Dow was down 101 points to 24,474. The S&P 500 was down 23 points to 2948, and the Nasdaq was down 90 points to 9284. Oil was up 42 cents to 33.91 per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to $1.72. Gold was down 5 cents to $1726.96 an ounce, and silver was up 2 cents to finish at $17.13 an ounce. Wheat is at $238 per metric ton, barley's at $236, canola's at $473, and corn is at $229 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 40 cents to $99.20, feeder cattle were up 3 cents to $126.03, and lean hogs were up $2.48 to $59.43. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day at 71.67 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says his government has no intention of making a COVID-19 vaccine mandatory if one becomes available. Kenney says there has been misinformation that the government recently adopted a law requiring mandatory vaccinations. He says if a safe vaccine is developed and approved, his government would only strongly encourage people to use it. Canada has some of the highest rates of multiple sclerosis in the world, and Alberta has some of the highest rates in the country. Johanna Green with the MS Society has more details in an interview with Paul Arthur. That Q&A is coming up.
Multiple sclerosis is a disease many of us have heard about, but likely we don't know a lot about it, although there's a good chance you know someone with MS. So joining me today to talk to you about this is Johanna Green. She's the Northern Regional Director for the Alberta and Northwest Territories Division with the MS Society of Canada. You can check out their website at mssociety.ca. Good to have you with us, Johanna. Can you first off the top here just explain what exactly is multiple sclerosis?
Sure, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. MS is essentially a chronic autoimmune disease of the central nervous system, which is comprised of the brain, the spinal cord, and the optic nerves. So essentially in multiple sclerosis, the body attacks itself. It targets the myelin in MS, which is the protective covering over our nerves. And so as that covering is depleted, it can eventually lead to even nerve damage. And so the places where that damage happens and the type of damage can impact the type of MS that a person has and the disease course that they'll eventually encounter.
Okay, and what would the typical MS symptoms be? I mean, how much variance is there in the severity of symptoms from person to person?
A tremendous amount of variance in symptoms from person to person and also from time to time within the same person. Some of the most common MS symptoms include extreme fatigue, numbness, tingling in the limbs, muscle weakness. It can also lead to impairment of vision, bladder and bowel issues, even cognitive impairment for some people. So a whole host of different symptoms. And as I said, very unpredictable in terms of how they present for each person and from time to time within that same person.
Okay. Can you share with us what it's like to live with that MS and these symptoms that you've described? And so there's got to be some challenges that come along with that. And again, it's going to be varying, because, just as you described there. And the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, must put some added stress on anyone with MS.
Absolutely. One of the hallmarks of living with MS is that uncertainty, that unpredictability that it brings. For people living with MS, some of the more common issues that they encounter are employment because of the episodic nature of MS, which can mean that at times a person feels reasonably well and healthy, but at other times they have what we call relapses, during which their symptoms will flare up. So that can lead to real challenges within the workforce. An unfortunate statistic is that 60% of people living with multiple sclerosis are eventually unemployed, which, as you might imagine, can lead to very real income security issues, as well as access to equitable treatments and care and housing. So lots of different complexities. COVID-19 adds just another layer of complexity to this already complex and unpredictable disease. Obviously, people experiencing a lot of anxiety and wondering, what could this mean for me as I already live with this very difficult disease? So at the MS Society, we've pivoted quickly to ensure that while we can't deliver in-person programs and services for the safety of all, we offer a wealth of online resources, from webinars on mental health, physical health, featuring various experts, as well as peer support and different things online where people can connect with experts and other people living with the disease.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we need to find a cure for this. In fact, this Sunday, May 24th, MS communities across Canada are going to be rallying at a nationwide virtual MS walk. So can you tell us how that's going to work and how our viewers could get involved in this as well?
Absolutely. So normally around this time of year, during MS Awareness Month in May, we would be coming together in communities across the country for our annual Jamin Built MS Walks. Obviously, in today's reality, we can't do that in person, but it was really important for us to be able to provide a space to still bring the MS community together. So this Sunday, we're very excited to be hosting our first ever virtual MS Walk, which is going to be comprised of really encouraging people to engage online in the social space. We have a couple of really neat activities planned as part of the day. At 10 a.m., we'll have a bit of an opening ceremonies. We're live streaming on Facebook that day. You can connect with our MS Society President and CEO, Pamela Valentine, who's going to be welcoming participants along with other members of the MS community who live with MS from across the country. So it'll be a real unification of Team Canada as we come together to create a future free of MS. Throughout the day, encouraging people people to do whatever they want as a show of support in the fight against MS, be it taking a safe walk around their neighborhood, having a dance party in their house, or doing anything else, and trying to turn it, if possible, into a bit of a fundraiser for the MS Society. So encouraging people to share photos, videos, and connect online using the hashtag #WeChallengeMS. Later that afternoon, we're also going to be featuring a country music concert at 2 o'clock, streaming on YouTube, featuring some amazing country artists, all in support of the fight against MS.
Okay, that sounds like fun. And yes, people can donate online, because this is a big part of this as well. Of course, it takes funds for the research and so forth, so they can just go to your website then to donate, or?
Absolutely, and there's a special section of our website, wechallengems.ca, where you can find all sorts of details about how you can get involved, how you can donate, and to learn about the great activities, very creative ones that people are doing in support.
Okay. How prevalent is MS? Now, I understand that Canada, for whatever reason, has one of the highest rates of MS, and in particular, I've heard that here in southern Alberta, rates are quite high.
Canada does have the dubious distinction of having one of the highest rates of MS in the entire world. Approximately 77,000 Canadians live with the disease, and on average, 11 people are diagnosed each and every day. Here in Alberta, we also have among the highest rates of MS in the entire country. Lots of question marks around why that is, and certainly poses lots of questions and suspicions around environmental factors. Certainly in Alberta, we do see pockets of increased prevalence, and that's something that our amazing team of researchers are continuing to look closely into.
Yeah, I mean, because of the geographical correlations, right? Is there an environmental cause of MS? So it sounds like we don't have any solid evidence on that. But do we know anything about the cause of MS? Do we know what some of the possibilities could be?
So scientists continue to investigate. However, over decades of research, lots of important discoveries have been made in that area. Currently, the most common hypothesis around the cause of MS is that it's a combination of factors, including environmental factors, genetic predisposition, as well as some lifestyle factors that also influence a person's susceptibility to the disease. Things like smoking and obesity that we have learned can correlate to a person's potential for developing MS. And so in a way, empowering to know that there are things people can do to hopefully, help ward against the disease. And the idea of possibly preventing MS in the future is something that actually is part of our conversation now, which in and of itself is really exciting.
Okay, yeah, prevention definitely, something we need to focus on here if at all possible. What would the average age of onset be, and what's the earliest onset you've ever seen?
So people are typically diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 49. So those are the prime career, education, and family building years. So of course, a huge impact when to be diagnosed with a chronic illness at that point in life. We have seen children as young as 2 diagnosed, and people older than 49 are also diagnosed. But most, as I said, diagnosed really during the prime of their lives between 20 and 49 years.
Okay. I understand that women are much more likely to develop MS as compared to men. Do we have any, do we know why that would be?
That is among the far too many questions that we have rather than answers in the world of MS. Women are 3 times more likely than men to develop MS. And so with that come a host of different kinds of questions and important topics, certainly around pregnancy MS and those kinds of pieces. And there's lots of information on our website. There's a specific section on MS and women's issues in MS, which is, of course, super relevant given those prevalency rates.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kinds of treatment are available for MS? What's working?
So there's been a tremendous resurgence of options for people living with MS. Currently, there are 15 different what we call disease-modifying therapies for people living with MS, specifically with the relapsing remitting form of MS, where symptoms will come and go over time. And just in the last couple of years, we've also had the first ever treatment emerge for the progressive form of MS, which has been a huge breakthrough. Lots more work needs to be done in that area, but obviously certainly now there is choice for people living with MS. We've moved from solely having injectable therapies, which, as you might imagine, having to take a needle every day isn't great for quality of life. So there are now oral options for taking some of those therapies. And so we're seeing people live much better with MS as a result of the emergence of some of those therapies. They, of course, aren't a cure, and many come with their own not so nice side effects, but certainly something to help improve quality of life as we continue to search out that cause and cure.
So again, these are helpful, but at this point, there's no cure that we know of, right? Are there any promising experimental treatments in development at this point?
Hugely exciting developments on this front. As I said, although we have that dubious distinction of having among the highest rates of MS in the entire world here in Canada, we're also home to some of the world's leading MS experts. So we are right in the backyard of some of the world's best researchers. Some of the areas of investigation right now that we're really excited about are areas such as myelin repair. So I talked about how MS sort of eats away at the myelin, the covering of the nerves. The current treatments really deal with addressing the inflammation that's caused by that, but they don't get to the bottom of actually repairing the myelin that's been damaged. So research underway right now is actually working on promoting repair of that myelin to actually possibly even reverse some of the symptoms of MS. I mentioned that recently there's been a new treatment for the progressive form of MS, which typically is the form that results in the most disability for people with the disease. So a lot more effort being invested into research into that area to hopefully be able to develop some new treatments sooner than later. Lots of work in the area of stem cells, and specifically there's a clinical trial underway right now around mesenchymal stem cells. So they're stem cells that come from the person's own body and are promising in that, unlike bone marrow transplantation therapy that involves intensive chemotherapy that's very risky, mesenchymal stem cell therapy has much less risk. So certainly something promising on the horizon. Also, areas of investigation that are of interest is what role the gut microbiome in our bodies might play in influencing MS. So investigation happening on so many fronts, and a really exciting time and a time of promise in MS research.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, when it comes to day-to-day life again, what kinds of activities are helpful for somebody with MS, like exercise, that sort of thing? Is that helpful, or is it just kind of basic? Yes, it's good to stay healthy overall for anybody.
Absolutely. Living a healthy, balanced lifestyle is among the most important things a person can do to be able to self-manage as much as that is possible their disease. Interestingly, years ago when someone was diagnosed with MS, they were told not to exercise. They were told that that was bad, it would exacerbate symptoms. Now things have changed almost 180 degrees. There's lots of evidence that proves that exercise in moderation and an appropriate level to your disease is actually very important in managing your disease. So we strongly encourage that. Actually, there are Canadian physical activity guidelines for people living with MS that you can find on our website.
Okay, great. And diet, of course, you want to eat healthy. Is there anything other than generally eating healthy? Is there anything really specific that scientists have discovered? This, eat this and it will help your MS stay stable or improve?
There are lots of different theories, and I would almost say fad diets out there that people have put out and have claimed, that have worked for them. In truth, most MS health experts really just, as boring as it sounds, advise sort of that high fiber, low fat diet and abiding by the Canada Food Guide.
Right, and likewise, holistic, kinds of treatments, naturopaths, whatever, homeopaths, that sort of thing. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, is there anything? I know there's probably lots of stuff on the internet. Some of it probably way out there, and other stuff maybe it actually does help. Is there any science that we know of that way? Is there anything natural that we know of that can help, or is it just basically still in progress being studied?
There are lots of other sort of lifestyle related choices people can make that can absolutely support managing their MS. Lots of people with MS benefit from physiotherapy, rehabilitation therapy, even massage. Stress management is another big piece in managing MS.
Yeah, so I mean, you can get depressed with this, that sort of thing. Like, I mean, yeah, just thinking that through, yeah, that would be hard on a person. So important then again to get some emotional support as well, right?
Absolutely. At the MS Society, making those connections, especially those peer-to-peer connections between people living with MS and other people who are living with it, who really understand it better than anyone else. So we actually have a peer support program, which is available to people. We connect a person living with MS who might be even newly diagnosed with someone else living with MS who's been trained, and they can connect online or by the phone as often as they would like to be able to get that support.
That's actually super. That sounds, yeah, bang on. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us here today. That was fascinating, actually. It was quite informative. So, Johanna, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Over the last number of weeks, it's been a steady stream of media coverage on coronavirus. And frankly, it can be a bit confusing to sort truth from misinformation. We just get bombarded. So we'll try to sort out some of that with someone who's trained in that field today. Our guest is virologist and molecular biologist Dr. Anjanette, or AJ Roberts, who is a research scholar with Reasons to Believe. You can check out their website at reasons.org. Dr. Roberts, good to have you with us. We have so much information coming at us from all directions. So as a virologist, you say there's one thing we may not even know to ask about this current situation.
Well, yes, Paul, it's great to be back on Bridge City. Thanks for having me here. And, I think one of the things that people are most surprised to hear is that this virus isn't just a respiratory virus. It's also what's called an enteric virus, which means it can infect the GI tract. And about 30 to 50% of the cases will have GI-related symptoms, things like diarrhea.
Okay, so the gastrointestinal, the GI. So maybe that's why people are stocking up on toilet paper, just in case,
Right. Maybe they had some kind of foresight that wasn't really out there in the public arena.
Right. And so that could be one of the symptoms then as well, is diarrhea?
It is. Although the most common symptom, of course, is fever with a dry cough. Yeah.
Okay. And again, some of it is asymptomatic, right? So no symptoms at all, which on the one hand...
That's surprising, but absolutely true. That's really surprising, but absolutely true. Those numbers for asymptomatic cases are as high as 80%. And so the range is between 50 to 80%.
And I guess that's good news if you're in that category and if you happen to catch it. The downside of that, I think, is that, you think you're fine, and probably most people who actually have no symptoms, they wouldn't know that they actually had it, right? So,
that's right.
Which makes it easier to pass on.
Yeah, double-edged sword for sure, right? You want to fall into that 80%, but that's why we all need to be careful to maintain the public health guidelines of good hand hygiene, good environmental hygiene, and keeping that physical distance at 6 to 8 feet if you're with somebody that's not intimately, in your own home. So
yeah, exactly. So AJ, where are you going for the latest information to stay on top of what's happening?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I go to social media, to trusted sources, but I also go to the Center for Health Security at Johns Hopkins. So Johns Hopkins has a Center for Health Security, and you can find that on their website. They've got a great resource page, and they do situational updates that they'll email you to your inbox every day.
Can the general public go there as well? And I mean, that would be a reliable source, I would think, right?
Absolutely, they can go there. Some people may not want all the information that they provide, but you can sort through that. It's not pared down for the general population, but for people who really want information about what's going on, that's a great place. Scott Gottlieb, who is the former FDA director, his Twitter site is a great place to follow. Helen Branswell, who works for Stat News, also her Twitter site has really good information. You're not going to go astray if you go to those sources. And then for actual travel guidance and answering your questions, cdc.gov for those in the US, WHO.int for an international World Health Organization information site. So that's where I would send people, and that's where I go myself.
No, it's good to know that there's some sources we can go where we can actually trust the information. Now, you did a fair bit of research on SARS back in when that was happening, and can you explain what the difference is between this virus and COVID-19, like SARS compared to COVID-19?
Yeah, actually, those two viruses are very similar. They're very similar biologically, but they're also dissimilar enough to be very important to us. SARS in 2003 had a much higher case fatality rate than most countries are experiencing with COVID-19. But biologically, the viruses are about 80% similar to one another, and that's why this one's also called SARS-2. Or SARS coronavirus 2, because it's so close biologically to the original SARS.
Okay, that one was worse. Now this one, here in Canada, the mortality rate is about just over 1%. And yet in other countries, it seems like Italy, for example, I think they may have a higher mortality rate. Is there a reason for that?
I think all of us have the potential to have a rate as high as Italy. Unfortunately, it's about how well we do the physical distancing, how well we follow public guidelines that keep us from being able to spread it, because this virus is very communicable. And, you know, as you already said, people can be without symptoms and they can be spreading a lot of virus even though they don't have symptoms. And so it's those countries like South Korea, China, Iceland that have done a really good job of tracing cases and isolating people and keeping them away from one another when they're sick, that the fatality rates are very, very low. Italy is a very unfortunate case. Their case fatality rate is very high compared to other countries. It's over 10% right now. It's around 12%, I believe. And so that is very high, but we all have the potential to have that level of case fatality. It depends on how well we're actually stopping the transmission from person to person and how much we can slow that down so that our healthcare systems don't become overwhelmed. Because when the healthcare system reaches capacity, they run out of ventilators, for instance, then you can no longer give the treatment to the severely ill and you're going to lose more people to the virus that you need to lose.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense for sure. Okay. Now, I believe this, like SARS and also this coronavirus, originated from China, it seems like. Is there any scientific reason for this that we know of, or is that just an unknown at this point?
Well, actually, it's a series of events that are unique, somewhat unique to China. There is another coronavirus that people have probably heard of because of a very high fatality rate called MERS. And that one actually originated in the Arabian Peninsula because it was transmitted from camels to humans. But SARS and SARS-2 are both probably originally isolated, or they're harbored in nature in bats. And so what happens in China is they have these things called wet markets, which are places that people can bring wild animals, or they can ship wild animals or domestic animals internationally to these wet markets. And these animals are alive and in crowded conditions and very unsanitary. And as you can imagine, animals that would normally be coming in contact with each other would never normally be coming in contact with each other are in close proximity and in large numbers in these markets. And so it's actually creating sort of a breeding ground for pandemics. And sometimes those viruses are able to make a jump from an animal into a human. And that's what happened in SARS. It jumped from something called a palm civet, which is sort of like a weasel-like animal. And in this case, we don't know what the intermediate host was, but both SARS and this one most assuredly are harbored in nature in bats.
Wow. So that's something we need to look at then to prevent this down the road is, you know, we need to maybe put some boundaries around those kinds of markets for sure. That makes sense.
Yeah, so the Chinese government has done that both times in SARS and in this case SARS-2. They've shut those markets down. But the problem is that they really need to keep those markets shut down.
They open them up again, yeah, which is, it needs to be a permanent thing, for sure. Hopefully we learn from this, real quick. Is there a difference, I mean, there must be some sort of difference, right, between the flu and the coronavirus in nature, right?
Yes, there's actually several differences. One I've already pointed to, that this can be a gastrointestinal virus as well as a respiratory virus. But biologically, the SARS virus is about twice the size of the influenza virus, and their genomes are structured differently. SARS has one big long piece of RNA, and influenza has 8 smaller pieces of RNA. And so yeah, I could talk about the biology for a very long time, but one of the most important differences is their stability outside a human host or outside an animal host, so that how long they can persist in the environment. And one of the other major differences that's important is how they can be spread. And so both of them are respiratory, both could probably be airborne, and both of them can be transmitted from surfaces. But because SARS and SARS-2 are much more stable outside a host cell, they can persist in the environment longer than influenza can. And so that makes it a much hardier virus and more transmissible.
Okay, good to know. What is some of the most common bad advice that you're hearing about?
Wow, there is some really bad advice out there. Some of it is probably related to drinking hot fluids or gargling with warm salt water or things to that effect. I think the rationale behind that advice is SARS is susceptible to high temperatures and high humidity. And so if it's a hot liquid, it should inactivate the virus. It's true that hot water helps if you're washing your hands with soap, because that combination of the soap and the hot water does a better job of inactivating the virus. But if you're relying on just heat and humidity to inactivate the virus, you're talking about temperatures that need to be around 100 degrees Fahrenheit and a humidity that needs to be over 95%, which is really high. And even then, you're talking about an exposure time of over 10 hours. And so that's the scientific information, and people are just reading sort of the summary information that it's heat and humidity and thinking incorrectly that hot fluids can help inactivate the virus. In fact, because it's an enteric virus that can be transmitted and have symptoms in the gastrointestinal system, it's pretty resistant to the acidic environment of the stomach. And so enjoy your tea, but don't think you're doing anything to stop SARS.
Good to know. Because yeah, my inbox keeps getting these emails, you know, and I'm going, you know, are people really going to do this? And some people I think are. And boy, it's best to get the science on this, I think. What is the best advice that you're hearing?
Really, the best advice is to follow the public health guidelines. That's what we need to do in order to control this as best we can. I think people are really misinformed if they think that we can contain it and sort of eradicate it. That's not going to happen. This virus is going to continue to spread through the population at varying rates, and the best thing we can do is to slow that rate down so that our health systems can keep pace.
Now, following that, I mean, I know no one can predict, you know, how long this is going to take to get back to normal once the curve flattens. But do you know how these types of viruses work long term? Is it likely that we'll see a second or a third wave of outbreaks resurface down the road?
It probably is likely. Again, it depends on how good a job we do controlling the virus and the virus spread on an ongoing basis. But you know, Iceland's a wonderful sort of case study. They have a population just over 300,000 people, and they were prepared before they actually had their first case. And so they were able to isolate and contact trace and do everything right from a public health standpoint. And they're probably going to see their cases, if they don't have any new introductions, and they shouldn't because nobody's coming in from the outside, they should be able to see their last case sort of resolved by the second week of May. And if that's true, good for Iceland. But Iceland will have a 99% population estimate that is still naive to the virus. And so if they travel someplace else or someone travels in who's asymptomatic at some later point in time, then it could start again in Iceland. And that's sort of the reason I bring that up is it's a small case study of what can happen in other places in the world, even if we're doing a good job of controlling it.
So this is going to take some time. Now, as a virologist and a person of faith as well, do you personally view that following local mandates, you know, such as the whole, you know, safer at home, shelter at home, does that demonstrate a lack of trust in God? Some people feel that it does.
Oh, I absolutely don't believe that at all. I absolutely believe that one of the ways that we exemplify love for one another and Christ-like love, even the kind of love that Christ exemplified and encourages us to follow, which is self-sacrificial love, that these are the kinds of ways that we can love at our own expense, but really for the sake of others. And so I think Christians ought to be secure in their own destiny, if you will. And so they shouldn't fear the virus. And if they're practicing good personal hygiene and environmental hygiene, they should be bold enough to help others that need help, but to do that wisely. But in that same vein of sort of doing what we can do to love the person in need, social distancing is doing what we can do to love the most vulnerable in our population. We don't always know who the people are with comorbidities.
One other angle on this too, some people are discussing the possibility of, does this actually undermine herd immunity? Your thoughts on that briefly?
It doesn't undermine herd immunity. If anything, it slows herd immunity. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to slow herd immunity because this virus has the potential to overwhelm our healthcare workers and our healthcare system.
Well, I'm up against the clock here, but really nice to hear your perspective here. We need to have, again, that balance, right? I mean, let's wash our hands, keep the social distancing, stay at home, and trust God, and don't worry too much at the same time, right?
Yes, and I would just leave people with the thought that maybe meditate on Psalm 139. It's a great scripture that talks about God being intimately acquainted with us, and He's always with us, and He's numbered our days before we've ever lived one of them. It's where I go to for encouragement.
Well, thank you so much for your expertise here today, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Paul. It's been great being on Bridge City News.
Good to have you. Dr. A.J. Roberts, molecular biologist with reasons to believe. And on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching today.